What if I told you that the first battle of your day is already over before you even get out of bed, before your feet touch the floor, before your coffee starts brewing, before the endless stream of notifications begins competing for your attention, something important has already happened. Without even realizing it, you have started deciding what kind of person you will be today, not through a conscious choice, not through a carefully planned decision, but through habit, through routine, through the invisible momentum created by every morning you've repeated without thinking. Most people spend their entire lives reacting. They react to the alarm clock. They react to their boss. They react to stressful situations. They react to fear, uncertainty, and inconvenience. They call this living. The Stoics called it something else. They called it sleepwalking. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome, commander of vast armies, ruler of the most powerful empire on earth, woke up every morning facing the same battle that you and I face today. Not a battle against enemies. Not a battle against political rivals. Not a battle against invading armies. His greatest battle was against himself. In the private journal he never intended anyone to read, he wrote these powerful words. At dawn, when you rise reluctantly, let this thought be present. I am rising to the work of a human being. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful man in the known world needed to remind himself why he should get out of bed. Why? Because the real battle has never been out there. The real battle has always been in here, inside the mind, inside the choices we make before the world ever sees us. And today, I want to share something extraordinary with you. Not motivational slogans, not empty affirmations, not feel-good quotes designed to make you feel inspired for 5 minutes and then disappear. I'm going to give you 7 lines, 7 powerful principles forged in the furnace of Stoic philosophy. Ideas tested through centuries of war, exile, hardship, slavery, leadership, and personal suffering. These 7 lines have survived more than 2,000 years because they work. And if you repeat them every morning with genuine understanding, they won't simply improve your day. They will begin transforming the person you are. They will slowly dismantle old habits, outdated beliefs, and limiting identities. And in their place, they will help build the person you are always capable of becoming. But I need you to stay with me, because these are not simple sentences. Behind every one of these lines stands an entire philosophy, a complete framework for seeing the world. Ideas that took some of history's greatest minds decades to understand and refine. Today, you're going to receive those lessons in a single sitting. So settle in, slow down, and give this your full attention, because worthwhile things are never rushed. Now, before we explore the 7 lines themselves, there's something essential you must understand. Most people think the morning is simply the beginning of a new day. The Stoics saw it differently. To them, the morning was a battlefield, a negotiation, a confrontation between 2 versions of yourself, the person you were yesterday, and the person you are capable of becoming today. Every morning, these 2 forces meet inside you. The first force is inertia, the gravitational pull of old habits, the comfort of familiarity, the identity you've grown accustomed to carrying. It whispers softly, stay where you are, rest a little longer, you can start tomorrow. You're fine just as you are. The second force is virtue, the deeper part of you that knows you're capable of more. The part that understands comfort can quietly become a prison. The part that recognizes growth rarely happens in convenience. The part that knows an unexamined life eventually leads nowhere meaningful. The Stoics understood this internal struggle better than almost anyone. Consider Epictetus. He wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He wasn't born into power. He was born a slave, yet he eventually became one of the most influential philosophers in history. And one of his most important teachings was surprisingly simple. He believed the first act of philosophy was waking up. Not physically waking up, mentally waking up. He told his students, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Notice what comes first. Not action, not productivity, not efficiency, not a morning routine. Identity. First say to yourself what you will be, before you check your phone, before you eat breakfast, before you open your email, before you speak to another human being. You must decide who you are. Because if you fail to make that decision consciously, the world will make it for you. Now, some of you may be thinking, this sounds like motivational fluff. How can a few words spoken in the morning possibly change anything? That's a fair question. And fortunately, the Stoics weren't asking anyone to believe in magic. They weren't mystics. They were practical observers of human nature. In many ways, they were engineers of the human mind. What they discovered through observation thousands of years ago is now supported by modern neuroscience. The first 20 minutes after waking are among the most influential moments of your entire day. During this period, your brain transitions from theta wave activity, the dreamlike state associated with sleep, into alpha wave activity, a calm and highly receptive state. In this window, your mental filters are weaker. Your mind is more open, more impressionable, more programmable. What you feed your mind during these moments doesn't simply affect your mood. It begins shaping the very pathways your brain follows throughout the day. The thoughts you repeat become familiar roads. The beliefs you reinforce become mental shortcuts. The words you consistently tell yourself become unconscious instructions guiding your behavior. The Stoics had a name for this practice. They called it prosoche, attention to oneself, deliberate awareness, conscious self-observation. Marcus Aurelius practiced it every morning through journaling. Epictetus taught it as the foundation of wisdom. Seneca structured his mornings around reflection, contemplation, and philosophical study. And they weren't doing it because it felt comforting. They weren't doing it because it sounded inspiring. They were doing it because they understood something most people never realize. The quality of your attention determines the quality of your life. And every morning gives you a chance to decide whether you will drift through another day unconsciously, or step into it with purpose, clarity, and strength. Now that you understand why the morning is a battlefield, it's time to pick up the first weapon. The first line is simple to say, yet incredibly difficult to live by. I am the author of my reactions. Nothing outside me has power unless I grant it. Read that again, slowly. I am the author of my reactions. Nothing outside me has power unless I grant it. At first glance, this may sound empowering, but if we're being honest, it's also deeply uncomfortable, because hidden inside this sentence is one of the most radical claims ever made about human freedom. It means that every moment you've felt offended, every moment you've felt powerless, every moment you've been consumed by anger, frustration, fear, or resentment, those reactions were not simply imposed upon you by the world. They were authored by you. And before you misunderstand what the Stoics meant, let's be careful. This idea is often distorted. The Stoics were not saying your feelings are invalid. They were not asking you to become emotionless. They were not teaching suppression. They were not telling you to transform yourself into a cold machine. Marcus Aurelius cried when he lost children. Seneca openly grieved. Epictetus spent part of his life as a slave in chains. These men understood suffering. They felt pain. They felt grief. They felt disappointment. They felt everything that makes us human. The difference was not that they avoided emotion. The difference was that they understood emotion, and they made a distinction that changed everything. A distinction between what the Stoics called the impression and the assent. Epictetus explained this idea with remarkable clarity. He said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. Think carefully about that. Not by things, but by the meaning assigned to those things. An event occurs. Someone insults you. Someone ignores you. Someone betrays your trust. Those events happen. But what happens next is where your power begins. Because between the event and your reaction, there is interpretation. There is judgment. There is a story you tell yourself. And it is often that story, not the event itself, that causes the suffering." Marcus Aurelius may be one of the greatest examples of this principle in action. Imagine the pressures he faced. He ruled an empire. He was surrounded by people who constantly wanted something from him. Flatterers seeking favor. Politicians plotting behind closed doors. Advisors hiding their true intentions. Generals making costly mistakes. Family members creating disappointment. If anyone had a reason to become bitter, reactive, or cynical, it was Marcus. Yet when we read his private journal, a document never intended for public eyes, we discover a man engaged in a daily practice of mastering his reactions. Again and again, he reminds himself of the same lesson. Every morning he would say, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." At first, that sounds pessimistic, almost negative. But it isn't. It's preparation. It's mental training. Marcus wasn't expecting perfection from the world. He was preparing himself not to be shocked by reality, not to be surprised by difficult people, not to be controlled by his emotions when challenges inevitably appeared, because a person who has already anticipated difficulty is far less likely to be conquered by it. In many ways, the first battle is won before it begins. Marcus continues with an even deeper observation. He writes, "But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own." Notice what happens here. He doesn't merely control his reaction. He transforms his perspective. Instead of seeing difficult people as enemies, he sees them as fellow human beings, flawed, confused, struggling with their own weaknesses, just as he struggled with his. This is the heart of Stoicism. Not suppression, transformation, not pretending the difficulty isn't there, but choosing to see it differently. That is why this first line is so powerful. I am the author of my reactions. Nothing outside me has power unless I grant it. Don't rush through those words. Don't treat them like another motivational quote. Sit with them. Let them challenge you. For the next 60 seconds, think about the person or situation that triggers you most. Maybe it's a difficult coworker. Maybe it's a strained relationship. Maybe it's criticism. Maybe it's failure. Maybe it's your own self-doubt. Bring that image into your mind. Feel the familiar emotional pull, the urge to react, the urge to blame, the urge to surrender your peace, and then repeat the line again. I am the author of my reactions. Because you are not merely a character being pushed around by circumstances. You are the author, and authors have power. Authors decide how the story unfolds. Authors choose the meaning of events. Authors determine what comes next. That is the first lesson. Now let's move to the second. I will guard my attention as my most finite resource. Most people believe time is their most valuable asset, and certainly time matters. But the Stoics recognize something even more fundamental. You can possess plenty of time and still waste your life completely if you lose control of your attention, because attention comes before time. A life is not measured simply in hours. It is measured by what occupied those hours. More specifically, it is measured by what occupied your mind during those hours. Seneca, perhaps one of the sharpest thinkers in Stoic history, wrote one of the most devastating observations about distraction ever recorded. In his essay on the shortness of life, he writes, "It is not that we have so little time, but that we lose so much." Think about how profound that statement is. Most people complain that life is short. Seneca disagreed. He believed life was long enough for extraordinary achievements. The problem was not the amount of time given. The problem was how carelessly it was spent. He continues, "Life is long enough, and it has been given in sufficiently generous measure to allow the accomplishment of the very greatest things if the whole of it is well invested." And remember, he wrote those words nearly 2,000 years ago, before smartphones, before social media, before endless notifications, before 24-hour news cycles, before algorithms designed by teams of behavioral psychologists whose entire job is to compete for your attention. Imagine what Seneca would think if he saw a modern morning. A person waking up and immediately reaching for a phone, scrolling before thinking, consuming before creating, reacting before choosing. If the distractions of ancient Rome concerned him, what would he say about ours? But here's the deeper Stoic insight that many people miss. Attention is not neutral. It is not passive. It is not harmless. Attention is formative. What you repeatedly give your attention to slowly shapes who you become. Not just your mood, not just your habits, your character. Every thought you repeatedly entertain, every distraction you repeatedly follow, every fear you repeatedly feed, each one leaves a mark. Because attention is not merely something you spend. Attention is something that builds you. And whether you realize it or not, you are becoming whatever consistently occupies your mind. Now, if attention truly shapes who you become, then the next question is obvious. What exactly are you allowing to color your mind every single day? Marcus Aurelius answered that question with a sentence so simple that many people overlook its depth. He wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Read those words slowly. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. This is not merely poetic language. Marcus was making a profound philosophical statement about human nature. He was saying that your mind does not simply observe reality. It gradually becomes whatever it repeatedly focuses on. You become what you consistently think about. Consider what happens when you begin your morning immersed in outrage, scrolling through conflict, absorbing anger, consuming negativity. Hour by hour, your inner world begins to take on those colors. Anxiety becomes easier. Irritation becomes more familiar. Suspicion becomes more natural. Now think about gossip. If your attention constantly feeds on other people's flaws, mistakes, and shortcomings, your character slowly absorbs those patterns. Petty thoughts become normal. Judgment becomes automatic. Your mind starts seeing the world through a lens of criticism. And what about distraction? The endless stream of shallow entertainment. The constant switching between tabs, videos, notifications, and random impulses. At first, it seems harmless. But over time, something important begins to weaken. Your ability to focus. Your ability to think deeply. Your capacity for contemplation. Depth slowly gives way to restlessness. But the opposite is also true. If you begin your mornings with reflection, purpose, and intentional thought, your mind absorbs those qualities as well. When you ask yourself what truly matters, when you direct your attention toward virtue, when you spend time considering who you want to become, your character begins to take on those colors. Patience grows, wisdom grows, discipline grows. The soul is always being dyed. The only question is by what? The Stoics had a fascinating word for the part of the mind responsible for this process. They called it the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the commanding center of the soul. And despite how mysterious the word sounds, the idea itself is remarkably practical. The hegemonikon is the part of you that can step back and observe, the part that notices impulses before acting on them, the part that can watch emotions rise without immediately obeying them, the part that can interrupt old habits and choose a different path. In modern terms, it is your capacity for conscious choice, your ability to govern yourself, your internal ruler. Epictetus believed that the entire purpose of philosophy was strengthening this faculty, because without it, you become a servant to every impulse, every fear, and every distraction. With it, you become capable of self-mastery. He expressed this idea beautifully when he wrote, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." Notice how demanding that advice really is. Before you can accept reality as it is, you first have to become aware of your resistance to it. You must catch yourself reacting. You must notice when your attention has drifted into resentment, fear, frustration, or complaint. You must become conscious. And consciousness requires training. It requires a strong hegemonikon, a mind capable of observing itself. That training begins every single morning. Every morning you choose what deserves your first attention. Every morning you strengthen or weaken the ruling faculty of your mind. And now I want to be very direct with you, because this next point matters. There is a war being fought for your attention, not metaphorically, literally. Every notification on your phone, every social media feed, every autoplay video, every carefully designed algorithm, every flashing badge demanding a click. These are participants in a battle most people don't even realize they're fighting. And the battlefield is your mind. The architects of these systems understand something Seneca recognized 2,000 years ago. Attention is the most valuable resource in existence, because where attention goes, behavior follows. And where behavior goes, life follows. If someone captures your attention, they influence your actions. If they influence your actions long enough, they influence your future. The people designing these systems understand this very well. That is why entire industries compete for every second of your focus. And perhaps nowhere is this battle more important than in the first moments after waking. Those first 20 minutes. The most neurologically fertile period of your day. The most impressionable. The most programmable. If those moments belong to someone else, they gain enormous influence over how the rest of your day unfolds. Not because of a conspiracy. Not because anyone is secretly controlling you. But because systems are designed to maximize engagement. And engagement often comes at the expense of attention. At the expense of awareness. At the expense of sovereignty. The Stoic response to this challenge is not to reject technology. It is not to throw away your phone. It is not to flee society. The Stoic response is much more practical. The deliberate morning. A morning in which your ruling faculty wakes up before the world gets access to it. A morning where your attention belongs to you first. A morning where you guard your mind the way a soldier guards the gates of a fortress. Because once the gates are open, anything can enter. But if the gates are protected, you decide what gets through. That is why the second line matters so much. I will guard my attention as my most finite resource. Don't repeat it casually. Treat it like a commitment, a declaration, a promise. Identify the things that will compete for your attention today. Name them specifically. The apps, the distractions, the worries, the conversations, the habits, the anxieties. Bring them into awareness. And before they have a chance to take control, spend 5 deliberate minutes directing your attention yourself. Write a journal entry. Reflect on your priorities. Sit quietly and think about what truly matters. Choose a single intention for the day. Guard the gate before the siege begins. Now we arrive at the third line. And for many people, this will be the most difficult one of all. I choose voluntary difficulty. I am not made for ease. I am made for excellence. Most modern morning routines focus on comfort, optimization, convenience, making life easier. The Stoics offered something radically different. They believe that greatness requires friction, that strength requires resistance, that character is built through challenge, and most importantly, they believe that difficulty should not always be avoided. Sometimes it should be chosen, voluntarily. The Stoics practiced a discipline known as ascesis, a Greek word meaning training, exercise, deliberate discipline. It is the root of the word ascetic, and it involved intentionally exposing oneself to discomfort, not because suffering was good, but because dependence on comfort was dangerous. They would choose the harder path when an easier one was available. They would choose cold when warmth was available, simplicity when luxury was available, discomfort when convenience was available, not out of self-punishment, but out of self-development. Seneca provides one of the clearest examples. Despite being one of the wealthiest men in Rome, he would occasionally spend several days living as simply as possible. He ate the cheapest food, wore rough clothing, slept without luxury. And he did this by choice, not because he had to, because he wanted to train himself. In a letter to his friend Lucilius he writes, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress." Then he asks a remarkable question. Is this the condition that I feared? Think about that. He was rehearsing hardship, practicing adversity before adversity arrived. Teaching himself that he was stronger than comfort had convinced him he was. Again and again, voluntarily, preventatively, deliberately, he was proving to himself that he could handle far more than he imagined. And that leads us to a question the modern world rarely asks. What if comfort is not always a blessing? What if, in some cases, comfort is actually a danger? Because that is exactly what the Stoics believed. If voluntary difficulty is the path to excellence, then we must confront an uncomfortable truth about the modern world. Most people are not being trained to grow stronger. They are being trained to become more comfortable. And the Stoics would have seen that as a serious danger. Not because comfort itself is evil. Not because rest, warmth, beauty, or pleasure are wrong. The Stoics enjoyed many of these things themselves. The danger begins when comfort stops being a tool and becomes the goal. When ease becomes the measure of a successful life. When convenience becomes the highest value. That is where the problem starts. If the Stoics could look at modern culture, with its obsession with eliminating friction, removing inconvenience, and making every experience easier, they would likely be deeply concerned, not because they hated pleasure, not because they wanted people to suffer, but because they understood a subtle truth that most people never notice. The more you optimize your life for comfort, the more uncomfortable discomfort becomes. And that creates a dangerous cycle. Every difficult conversation you avoid makes difficult conversations seem even harder next time. Every challenge you walk away from trains your mind to retreat more quickly in the future. Every time you choose the easy road, the difficult road begins to feel increasingly threatening. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, comfort starts shrinking your world, until one day you realize that you are only capable of doing what feels easy. And a person who can only function when conditions are comfortable is a person who is completely vulnerable to reality, because reality does not care about your comfort. Life does not organize itself around convenience. Marcus Aurelius understood this better than most. There is a passage in Meditations that I find deeply human. Remember, this was not a book written for an audience. It was not intended to inspire millions. It was a private conversation between a man and himself. A man who happened to be the most powerful ruler on earth. And in that private conversation, Marcus catches himself doing something incredibly familiar. He doesn't want to get out of bed. Think about that. The Emperor of Rome, commander of armies, ruler of an empire stretching across continents, lying in bed, feeling exactly what you and I have felt countless times. The desire to stay comfortable, the temptation to postpone action, the pull toward ease. And so he writes to himself, "Is it your profession to lounge in bed or to be in action?" Then he continues, "See how plants, sparrows, ants, spiders, these all perform their work and cooperate in order. Are you unwilling to do the work of a human being?" What makes these words powerful is their honesty. Marcus isn't lecturing others. He's challenging himself, calling himself out, holding himself accountable, asking a simple but profound question. Are you unwilling to do the work of being who you were meant to be? Because Marcus understood something that many people never realize. The attraction to comfort is not merely laziness. It is a philosophical threat. It is the force inside us that prefers comfort over growth, safety over development, convenience over excellence. It is the part of us that would rather remain asleep than become something greater. And Marcus fought that battle every single morning. Not because discipline came naturally to him, not because he possessed superhuman willpower, but because he had trained himself, day after day, year after year, choosing voluntary difficulty whenever possible, not as punishment, not as self-denial, but as preparation, because he understood a truth that comfort can never reveal. The strongest version of yourself exists beyond the boundaries of comfort. You cannot discover courage without facing fear. You cannot discover resilience without resistance. You cannot discover strength without challenge. The Stoic claim at the heart of this third line is simple but demanding. Human beings were not designed primarily for ease. We were designed for arete, the Greek concept of excellence. Arete is difficult to translate because it means much more than success. It means functioning at the highest level of your nature, becoming the fullest expression of what you are capable of being. And that is not something you achieve once. It is not a finish line. It is not a trophy. It is not a destination. It is a daily practice, a continuous commitment, a choice repeated again and again, every morning, every challenge, every decision, the choice between comfort and growth, the choice between ease and excellence. The Stoics believe that human beings occupy a unique place in the natural order. Unlike other creatures, we possess the ability to reflect on ourselves. We can ask questions. Why am I here? What kind of person am I becoming? Am I living according to my highest potential? That capacity is a gift, but it is also a responsibility. Because if you have the ability to become more and choose not to, something valuable is lost. To spend an entire life chasing comfort when you are capable of excellence. To live reactively when you could live intentionally. To remain passive when you could become extraordinary. The Stoics would argue that this is not merely a missed opportunity. It is a failure to honor your own nature. That is why this third line matters. I choose voluntary difficulty. I am not made for ease. I am made for excellence. Don't say it casually. Apply it immediately. Think of one difficult thing you have been avoiding. One conversation you know you need to have. One discipline you keep postponing. One uncomfortable truth you continue refusing to face. Bring it clearly into your mind. Then make a commitment. Not to solve it completely today. Not to conquer it all at once. Just one step. One deliberate action. One movement forward. Because every act of voluntary difficulty is a vote. A vote for the person you are becoming. A vote for courage. A vote for growth. A vote for excellence. And with that, we arrive at the fourth line. This moment is enough. I release the past and refuse to fear the future. So far, we have explored reactions, attention, difficulty. Now we must explore something even deeper. Time itself. Not schedules. Not productivity systems. Not calendars. But your relationship with time. The way your mind constantly travels backward and forward. And the price you pay for that habit. The Stoics had an incredibly clear understanding of human suffering. They knew that suffering often comes from two mental habits that have existed in every generation: regret for the past, and anxiety about the future. We carry memories that cannot be changed. We replay mistakes. We revisit old conversations. We relive failures long after they have ended. At the same time, we worry about events that have not happened, problems that may never arrive, fears that exist only in imagination. And while our attention is trapped between yesterday and tomorrow, something important is lost. The only moment that is actually real, the present. Epictetus understood this deeply. He wrote, "Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present." Think about the wisdom in that sentence. The future is not asking for your fear. It is asking for your preparation. And if reason is enough today, it will be enough tomorrow as well. Marcus Aurelius expressed the same idea even more directly. If excellence requires courage and presence, then the next lesson may be the most important of all. Because no matter how disciplined you become, no matter how strong your intentions are, everything ultimately comes down to one thing. Can you fully inhabit the moment you are living right now? Marcus Aurelius gave a surprisingly direct answer. Confine yourself to the present, not as a motivational slogan, not as a comforting phrase to post online, as a philosophical command, a way of life, a discipline. And here's something worth reflecting on. Many people reach adulthood without ever fully experiencing a single present moment. They are physically present, but mentally somewhere else. Their bodies are here, yet their minds are replaying yesterday's conversations, revisiting old mistakes, imagining different outcomes, or projecting fears into futures that may never arrive. The mind is constantly traveling, backward, forward, anywhere except here. Modern psychology has a name for this: rumination. And research suggests that the human mind wanders away from the present moment nearly 47% of the time while awake. Think about that. Almost half of your life may be spent in places that do not actually exist. Not in reality, not in this moment, but in memory and imagination. The Stoics would not have been surprised by this finding. They observed the same tendency over 2,000 years ago, and they developed an entire philosophical practice designed to combat it. They called it prosoc, attention, awareness, the deliberate practice of returning to what is happening right now, this breath, this moment, this experience. Not because they were mystics, not because they sought altered states of consciousness, but because they understood something fundamental. Virtue can only be practiced in the present. You cannot demonstrate courage in a memory. You cannot exercise wisdom in an imagined future. You cannot perform justice in yesterday. You can only choose, act, respond, and live, right now. This moment is the only place where your character can actually exist. The only place where your decisions matter. The only place where your life is happening. And that brings us to one of the most powerful ideas ever developed in Stoic philosophy. An idea that sounds dark at first, but is actually one of the most liberating truths a human being can embrace. Memento mori. Remember that you will die. Many people hear this phrase and assume it is pessimistic. The Stoics saw it differently. To them, it was medicine, a cure for distraction, a cure for procrastination, a cure for taking life for granted. Marcus Aurelius writes, "Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly." Pause for a moment and really absorb that. Not someday. Not eventually. Now. Imagine that everything you have already experienced is complete. What would you do with the time that remains? How would you speak? How would you act? What would suddenly become important? Marcus continues with another powerful reflection. Perfection of character is this: to live each day as if it were your last, without frenzy, without apathy, without pretense, without frenzy, without panic, without rushing through life, without apathy, without emotional numbness, without pretense, without performing for others, simply living honestly and fully. When you truly understand that this moment will never return, something remarkable happens. The past begins to loosen its grip, the future becomes less intimidating, and the present suddenly becomes radiant, not because everything is perfect, not because every problem disappears, but because reality itself becomes precious. This morning, this breath, this conversation, this chance to begin again. One day, there will be a final morning, a final sunrise, a final opportunity to wake up. And future, you would give anything to return to this ordinary day you are living right now. That realization changes everything. Seneca expressed this idea beautifully. He wrote that life consists of three parts: the past, the present, and the future. The past is fixed, certain, untouchable. The future is uncertain, unknown, not yet here. And the present? The present is so brief that it almost slips through our fingers as soon as we notice it. Yet it is the only part that truly belongs to us. Seneca writes, "Omnia aliena sunt. Tempus tantum nostrum est." Everything else is alien to us. Time alone is ours. And then he delivers a devastating observation. The one thing that truly belongs to us is also the thing we surrender most carelessly. We hand it over to distractions, to worries, to endless scrolling, to other people's demands, to fears about things that may never happen, to noise, constant noise. A world that often profits from your distraction has no interest in your flourishing. But you should, which is why this fourth line matters so deeply. This moment is enough. I release the past and refuse to fear the future. Don't rush through those words. Practice them. Right now. Take 3 slow breaths. On the first breath, release something from yesterday. A mistake, a disappointment, a regret, something you can no longer change. Let it go. On the second breath, release a fear about tomorrow, a worry, an uncertainty, a future scenario that hasn't happened. Let it go. On the third breath, arrive, fully, completely, here. Feel your body. Feel the air around you. Notice that you are alive. Notice that you are present. Notice that this moment is real. You are here. And for now, that is enough. Begin. Now we arrive at the 5th line. And this is where Stoic philosophy becomes deeply practical, because this line separates those who admire wisdom from those who live it. My purpose is not comfort. It is contribution. At some point, every person must face a question that cannot be avoided forever. Why am I here? What is my life actually for? Most people spend years avoiding that question. The Stoics ran directly toward it. They developed a concept known as kiosis, a word that is difficult to translate, but one that points towards something profound. It describes the gradual expansion of what you consider to be yours. At first, your world is small. Your body, your desires, your comfort, your immediate concerns. Then the circle begins to widen. Your family becomes part of your concern, your community, your city, your nation, eventually, all of humanity. As your wisdom grows, your sense of responsibility grows with it. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. And remember, he was emperor. If anyone could have justified living entirely for himself, it was Marcus. Yet throughout Meditations, he repeatedly returns to the same theme: duty, service, contribution, responsibility to others. He writes, "What injures the hive injures the bee." A simple sentence, yet it contains an entire philosophy. The individual cannot truly flourish while the whole suffers. He writes again, "We were born for cooperation, as were the feet, the hands, the eyelids, the upper and lower rows of teeth." Think about that image. Different parts, different functions, one shared purpose, working together, supporting one another, contributing to something larger than themselves. Marcus also reminds himself of the fragility of existence. A man's life is a mere moment, his existence a flux, his perception clouded, his body's composition corruptible. If life is so brief, if everything passes so quickly, then what should guide us? Marcus arrives at a remarkably simple answer. One thing, and one thing only: philosophy. Not philosophy as theory, not philosophy as intellectual entertainment, but philosophy as a way of living, a way of contributing, a way of becoming useful, a way of serving something larger than yourself. If purpose is found through contribution rather than comfort, then the next lesson becomes impossible to ignore. Because once you understand that life is not centered around you, everything begins to look different. Marcus Aurelius returned to this idea again and again throughout his writings. He reminds himself, "What injures the hive injures the bee." A simple sentence, yet hidden inside it is an entire philosophy. The bee cannot truly thrive if the hive suffers. The individual cannot flourish while remaining disconnected from the larger whole. Marcus expands on this idea even further when he writes, "We were born for cooperation, as were the feet, the hands, the eyelids, the upper and lower rows of teeth." Think about that image for a moment. Different parts, different functions, different responsibilities, yet all working together toward a common purpose. None existing purely for itself, none thriving in isolation. Marcus understood that human beings are much the same. We are not separate from one another. We are participants in something larger, a family, a community, a civilization, humanity itself. And because of that, the question of purpose cannot be answered solely through personal comfort. It must also include service, contribution, responsibility. Marcus also reminds himself of another difficult truth. A man's life is a mere moment, his existence a flux, his perception clouded, his body's composition corruptible. Everything is temporary. Everything changes. Life moves faster than we expect. And if that is true, then what can actually guide a person through such uncertainty? Marcus arrives at a remarkably clear answer. One thing, and one thing only: philosophy. Not philosophy as abstract theory, not philosophy as intellectual entertainment, but philosophy as a practical guide for living, a framework for deciding who to be when life becomes difficult, a compass pointing toward virtue. And what does philosophy ultimately teach? Something surprisingly humbling. You are not the center of the story. That idea may sound obvious, yet most people spend years unconsciously acting as though everything revolves around them: their happiness, their comfort, their reputation, their security, their desires. But the Stoics discovered something profoundly counterintuitive. The more intensely you chase happiness for its own sake, the more elusive it becomes. The more desperately you pursue comfort, pleasure, recognition, and approval, the less satisfied you often feel. And the opposite is equally true. The more you focus on contribution, the more you focus on excellence, the more you focus on serving something greater than yourself, the more fulfillment quietly arrives. Not because you chased it, but because it emerged naturally, unexpectedly, almost as a side effect. This is not a contradiction. It follows directly from Stoic reasoning. The Stoics use the word eudaimonia. Many people translate it simply as happiness, but that translation is incomplete. A better word might be flourishing, thriving, living fully in accordance with your nature. Eudaimonia is not a feeling. It is not excitement. It is not pleasure. It is not a temporary emotional high. It is a way of functioning, a state of being. You flourish when you use reason well. You flourish when your actions align with your values. You flourish when your life contributes to the greater whole of which you are a part. From the Stoic perspective, happiness is not something you find. It is something that emerges naturally when you live virtuously. And perhaps no one embodied this principle more powerfully than Epictetus. His life itself became an argument for everything the Stoics believed. Consider where he began. Not as a respected teacher, not as a philosopher, not as a scholar. He was born a slave, an actual slave, property owned by a Roman master named Epictetus. His life was not metaphorically constrained. It was literally controlled by another human being. Historical accounts tell us that his master once twisted his leg. Whether out of cruelty or amusement, we do not know. As the pressure increased, Epictetus calmly warned him, "You will break it." The twisting continued. His leg broke. And Epictetus simply replied, "Did I not tell you that you would break it?" Think about the extraordinary composure required for such a response. Not anger, not panic, not self-pity, just clarity, just acceptance of reality. Eventually, Epictetus gained his freedom. And what happened next is remarkable. The former slave became one of the most influential teachers in the ancient world. He established a school. Students traveled long distances to study under him. Powerful families sent their sons to learn from him. Even Marcus Aurelius would later absorb many of his ideas through his teacher Rusticus. Now ask yourself something. What would it have meant for a man born into slavery to build his philosophy around comfort? It would have been impossible, meaningless, absurd. Comfort was never guaranteed. Comfort was never fully under his control. And because it was outside his control, it could never become the purpose of his life. Epictetus learned this lesson in the harshest classroom imaginable. He discovered that comfort can disappear, status can disappear, freedom can disappear, possessions can disappear, circumstances can change overnight. But something always remains: character, choice, response, the contribution you make to the moment in front of you. Those things remain yours. And that is what Epictetus built his life upon. Not comfort, not luxury, not security, character. And in doing so, he became so internally free that men born into privilege envied his peace. Roman nobles, political elites, the sons of senators, all admired the serenity of a man who once owned nothing. That is the power of a life built on contribution rather than comfort. So when you repeat the fifth line, "My purpose is not comfort, it is contribution," pause for a moment and ask yourself one simple question: who am I serving today? And how? Not in some grand, world-changing way. Not necessarily. Perhaps it is a colleague who needs encouragement. Perhaps it is a family member who deserves your full attention. Perhaps it is a task you normally rush through, but today you choose to do with care and excellence. Perhaps it is simply showing up fully where you are needed. Find it, name it, move toward it, because purpose becomes clearer the moment you stop asking what life owes you and start asking what you can contribute. Now we arrive at the sixth line, and for many people, this may be the hardest one yet. Not because it is intellectually complicated, but because it forces us to face something we spend most of our lives trying to avoid: loss. Everything I love is borrowed. I will hold it gently. The Stoics had a practice known as premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity, the premeditation of loss. Its premise was simple and deeply uncomfortable. Regularly imagine losing the things you love: your health, your possessions, your relationships, your status, even your own life. To modern ears, this can sound pessimistic, almost unhealthy. We are taught to avoid such thoughts, to stay positive, to focus only on best-case scenarios, to visualize success, to affirm abundance, to avoid thinking about loss altogether. But the Stoics argued that this instinct is precisely what makes people fragile, because when you never contemplate losing something, you slowly begin to assume it will always be there. You stop seeing it as temporary. You start treating it as permanent, and gradually, your emotional life becomes built upon that assumption. You take things for granted. You stop appreciating them fully. You forget how precious they really are. Then one day reality arrives, as it always does, and something is taken away. A relationship ends, health declines, a loved one leaves, a chapter closes, and suddenly the foundation collapses. Not necessarily because the loss itself is impossible to bear, but because you were never prepared for its possibility. Marcus Aurelius knew this pain intimately. He had 13 children, and most of them died before he did. Again and again, he experienced the heartbreak of loss. Children taken by illness, by circumstances beyond his control, by the harsh realities of ancient life. Even as the most powerful man in the world, he could not stop it. He could command armies. He could govern an empire, but he could not command fate. And that reality shaped his philosophy forever. If the 6th line teaches us to hold what we love gently, then the 7th and final line asks for something even more demanding. Not merely acceptance, not merely gratitude, but transformation. Because now we arrive at the highest peak of Stoic philosophy, the place where all the previous lessons converge. And yet, before we reach that summit, there is one final lesson hidden inside the reality of loss. Consider Marcus Aurelius once again, a man burdened by responsibilities almost impossible to imagine. While leading military campaigns, he faced war on multiple fronts. He endured devastating plagues. He navigated political betrayal. He suffered profound personal grief. And through all of it, something remarkable emerges from his writings. Not bitterness, not despair, not emotional numbness, but a deep and steady equanimity, a calm acceptance of reality that had been cultivated over decades of deliberate practice. Marcus writes, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." Think about what he is saying. The thing we call loss is often simply another name for change, and change is woven into the fabric of existence itself. Nothing remains fixed. Nothing remains untouched by time. Everything moves. Everything transforms. Everything passes. Marcus also writes, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, and do so with all your heart." Notice those final words. With all your heart. Not partially. Not cautiously. Not with emotional distance. With all your heart. This is where many people misunderstand Stoicism. They imagine it as emotional detachment, cold endurance, the suppression of feeling. But Marcus is teaching the exact opposite. He is teaching the courage to love deeply, while fully understanding that loss is inevitable, to embrace life without guarantees, to care without ownership, to cherish without clinging. That is not emotional weakness. That is extraordinary strength. Epictetus offers one of the most powerful exercises in all of philosophy. He tells his students, when you kiss your child goodnight, whisper to yourself that tomorrow you may die. When you embrace your wife, remember that tomorrow she may be gone. When you sit in your comfortable home, remember that tomorrow it may be ashes. At first hearing, these words sound unsettling, perhaps even frightening. But Epictetus is not teaching fear. He is teaching appreciation. He is teaching presence. He is teaching gratitude so intense that it borders on heartbreak. Because the person who genuinely understands that a moment may never return experiences that moment differently. The parent who knows a bedtime kiss is not guaranteed tomorrow does not rush through it. The spouse who understands the fragility of life does not take a simple embrace for granted. The friend who understands impermanence listens more carefully, loves more deeply, shows up more fully. The awareness of loss does not weaken love. It strengthens it. It makes every ordinary moment more precious, more vivid, more alive. Many people encounter this idea through Buddhism. The Buddha taught Seneca the principle of impermanence as one of the fundamental truths of existence. And yes, the resemblance is striking. But the Stoics arrived at a similar conclusion through a different route. Not through spiritual revelation, not through mystical insight, but through observation, reason, careful attention to nature itself. They simply noticed what reality continually demonstrates. Everything changes. Everything passes. Nothing remains forever. And both traditions ultimately arrive at the same insight. Much of our suffering does not come from loss itself. It comes from our expectation that things were supposed to last forever. The larger the gap between expectation and reality, the greater the suffering. The Stoics sought to close that gap, not by loving less, but by loving wisely, by loving with open hands instead of clenched fists. When you stop demanding permanence from an impermanent world, something remarkable happens. You become more resilient, not because you care less, but because you understand more. When you repeat the sixth line, everything I love is borrowed, I will hold it gently. Pause. Think of 3 things in your life that you have quietly begun taking for granted. Perhaps a person, perhaps your health, perhaps an ability you rely on every day without noticing. Imagine, for a moment, what life would feel like without them. Feel the weight of that possibility. Then return to the present, and approach those things today with greater gratitude, greater attention, greater presence. This is not pessimism. This is one of the deepest forms of love available to a human being. And now we arrive at the 7th and final line, the summit, the culmination of everything we have discussed. I do not just accept my fate. I love it. 2 Latin words capture this entire philosophy. Amor fati, the love of fate, not tolerance of fate, not resignation to fate, not enduring fate, loving it. This may be the most radical idea in Stoicism, possibly one of the most radical ideas in all of philosophy, because if you truly embody it, not merely repeat it, but live it, you become extraordinarily difficult to defeat. So what exactly is amor fati? Marcus Aurelius gives us a powerful image. He writes, "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it." Picture that fire. Whatever enters it becomes fuel. Wood becomes fuel. Debris becomes fuel. Obstacles become fuel. The fire transforms everything. That is the Stoic ideal. Not merely surviving adversity, transforming adversity. Not saying, I can tolerate this. Not even saying, I accept this. But saying, I will use this. I will turn this into something valuable. I will make this part of my growth. Centuries later, Friedrich Nietzsche would popularize the phrase amor fati. Though deeply influenced by Stoicism, he expressed the idea in his own words. He wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, to want nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not for all eternity, not merely endure what is necessary, but love it, love reality exactly as it is, not despite its difficulties, but because of what those difficulties make possible." Marcus Aurelius expresses the same idea in what may be one of the most practical pieces of wisdom ever written. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Read that again. What stands in the way becomes the way. Every obstacle contains a lesson. Every setback contains material. Every failure contains instruction. Every loss contains an opportunity for transformation. The obstacle is not separate from the path. The obstacle is the path. The betrayal teaches discernment. The failure teaches humility. The loss teaches gratitude and presence. The hardship teaches strength that comfort never could. The challenge teaches courage. The setback teaches patience. And perhaps most importantly, every difficulty contributes something essential to the person you are becoming. There is no version of your highest self built entirely from ease. There is no extraordinary character formed on a perfectly smooth road. The strongest version of you is shaped by resistance, refined by adversity, forged by reality. The person you are capable of becoming could only be built through the experiences you have lived. Exactly these experiences, exactly these challenges, exactly this path. And that is why the Stoic does not merely endure fate. The Stoic learns to love it. Before we finish this journey, there is one final misunderstanding that must be cleared away. Because many people hear the phrase love your fate, and immediately assume it means surrender. They assume it means giving up. They assume it means becoming passive in the face of life. Nothing could be further from the truth. Amor fati is not fatalism. It is not resignation. It is not saying, whatever happens, happens. I have no power. I have no choice. In fact, it demands the exact opposite. It asks you to become more active, more engaged, and more intentional than ever before. What amor fati truly means is this: whatever reality is placed in front of me, this is now the material I must work with, and I will work with it completely, without complaint, without hesitation, without reservation. Imagine a runner who twists an ankle. They have 2 choices. They can spend their energy resenting the injury, fighting reality, replaying what happened, and wishing it had never occurred. or they can pause and ask a different question. This is my reality today. Given this reality, what is the finest thing I can build from it? The Stoic chooses the second path, not as a coping mechanism, not as positive thinking, but as a philosophical commitment. A commitment to extracting every possible ounce of growth, wisdom, and excellence from whatever circumstances life provides, no matter how those circumstances arrived. Now, return one final time to Epictetus. His life remains one of the most powerful demonstrations of this principle ever recorded. This was a man born into slavery, a man who owned nothing, a man whose freedom was taken before he ever had a chance to choose it. Most people would view such a condition as the complete opposite of everything worth loving. Yet Epictetus did something extraordinary. He transformed that condition into wisdom. He transformed suffering into insight. He transformed limitation into freedom. He did not spend his life hating his circumstances. He did not spend his life wishing reality had been different. And he certainly did not spend his life waiting for perfect conditions before living fully. Instead, he used his condition as a teacher more demanding than any philosopher, a teacher more honest than any book. Through slavery, he came to understand something that many free people never discover. True freedom has very little to do with external conditions. Freedom, Epictetus taught, is not the absence of chains. Freedom is the sovereignty of the inner self. Freedom is the ability to remain master of your own mind regardless of what happens around you. That is why he wrote, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." Think about those words. They came from a man who had every reason to curse his fate, every reason to become bitter, every reason to feel defeated. Yet he chose a different path. He chose to love reality because reality shaped him into exactly the person he needed to become. So when you say the seventh line, "I do not just accept my fate, I love it," pause for a moment. Think about the most difficult thing in your life right now, the challenge you wish would disappear, the setback you wish had never happened, the burden you wish someone else could carry. Now ask yourself a different question, not, "Why is this happening to me?" but, "What is this making me capable of becoming?" That question changes everything, because it shifts your attention away from victimhood and toward transformation, away from resistance and toward growth, away from complaint and toward possibility. Find the answer, and then learn to love the transformation it demands from you. Now, let us bring all 7 lines together, not as motivational slogans, not as affirmations, but as daily philosophical practices. Every morning, say them slowly. Do not rush. Do not treat them like a checklist. Spend 30 to 60 seconds with each one. Think about it. Feel it. Understand it. Mean it. Line 1. I am the author of my reactions. Nothing outside me has power unless I grant it. Line 2. I will guard my attention as my most finite resource. Line 3. I choose voluntary difficulty. I am not made for ease. I am made for excellence. Line 4. This moment is enough. I release the past and refuse to fear the future. Line 5. My purpose is not comfort. It is contribution. Line 6. Everything I love is borrowed. I will hold it gently. And finally, line 7. I do not just accept my fate. I love it. Now let me tell you what happens when these lines stop being words and start becoming practice. Not for a day, not for a week, but month after month, year after year. Slowly, something begins to change. The things that once devastated you lose their power. Not because hardship disappears. It won't. Not because life suddenly becomes easy. It doesn't. But because every morning you have been training yourself to respond instead of react, to direct instead of drift, to meet difficulty as a practitioner rather than a victim. You begin to notice something fascinating. The people who seem calm under pressure, the people who seem impossible to shake, the people who remain grounded while everyone else falls apart. They were not born that way. They became that way through practice, through repetition, through discipline. They repeated principles like these until the words became beliefs. The beliefs became habits. The habits became instincts, and the instincts became character. Marcus Aurelius was not born with perfect composure. He trained for it. For decades, day after day, morning after morning, he trained himself to become the kind of man who could govern an empire, endure war, survive plague, face betrayal, grieve the loss of his children, and still write with the calm wisdom of someone at peace. He reminded himself repeatedly, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That is what these 7 lines are building. Not motivation, not temporary inspiration. Character. A stronger character. A wiser character. A freer character. Not the person who woke up this morning. The person you are capable of becoming. One morning at a time. One deliberate choice at a time. One courageous act at a time. More than 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius sat inside a military tent during a campaign and wrote one final instruction to himself. It remains just as relevant today as it was then. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Read that again. Do not argue. Do not speculate. Do not wait. Become. If these ideas have changed something inside you today, even in the smallest way, share them with someone else who is fighting their own morning battle. Because philosophy was never meant to remain trapped inside one mind. It was meant to travel. It was meant to help. It was meant to serve. As Seneca wrote, philosophy promises above all common sense, humanity, and fellowship. And that means something important. You are not walking this path alone. None of us are. We are learning together, growing together, and becoming stronger together. Until next time, keep choosing wisdom, keep choosing discipline, and keep choosing the person you are capable of becoming.